Christy, how would you describe survival mode?
For me, it was living in the moment. I really could not think about the past and could not plan for the future. I was living moment to moment, getting through the day, not thinking about the next day, just making it through, doing what I needed to do to get through.
I can relate to that. There is nothing more in the day than just getting through the next minute. And then sometimes it's really just getting through the next 10 seconds. You know what I mean? Welcome to Survival Mode Disrupted, the podcast for those who are done performing, done people pleasing, and done living life on autopilot. I'm your host, Letitia, the Survival Mode Disruptor, and this is where we create disruptive, unapologetic transformations for those who are ready to exit survival mode and reclaim their power. Every episode is your permission slip to burn the rule book, break the cycle, and finally build a life that feels like yours. So let's disrupt everything that's holding you back and start living life on your own terms. This is your trigger warning. This podcast is raw. It is real and it doesn't sugarcoat what it means to survive trauma, abuse, mental health battles, or even the aftermath of living in survival mode for too damn long. What you hear on Survival Mode Disrupted includes unfiltered stories, graphic details, and a vulnerable truth that may trigger some of the audience. Please prioritize your emotional safety. If something feels too heavy, pause, breathe, come back when you're ready, or not at all. Your healing is yours to honor. These episodes are based on lived experience, not therapy sessions or clinical advice. Listening does not replace mental health treatment or constitute a coach client relationship. If you're in crisis, please seek immediate help from a licensed professional or contact your local emergency services. This space is built with care, but it's also built for truth and built for disruption. Take what you need, leave the rest, and most of all, trust yourself. If this podcast speaks to your soul, you don't have to do this work alone. Feel free to join our free Facebook community for high achieving women ready to break cycles and heal out loud. Join us at Disrupting Survival Mode on Facebook, or grab the book that started this movement, Exiting Survival Mode, a raw step by step guide to help you identify, release, and rebuild from the survival patterns that have been keeping you stuck. Hello, 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 and welcome back to another episode of Survival Mode Disrupted. I am your host, Letitia, the Survival Mode Disruptor, and today we have Christy. Christy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Chris Filipino. I am a retired speech language pathologist and retired massage therapist. So I now live in New Jersey. I spend my time writing. I'm an author now, and I also train dogs. So that's my other pastime. But I am a survivor of a pretty lengthy trauma.
I am so excited to have you here. Audience, just so you know, Christy got me really excited because she used to live in Bermuda. So we
Yes.
have something in common. And I love that. So, Christy, why don't you tell us your story to and through survival mode? And I know you said you went through some lengthy trauma, so we would love to hear all about it.
All right. In 1977, the summer of 1977, I worked as a receptionist, as an intern for Mobil Oil Corporation in New York City. And my job was to meet and greet people that came in to apply for a job, take their application, interview. So this one morning, this woman walked in and she did a lot of strange, I call them characters, from the city walk in just to get out of the weather. And this particular morning, this woman walked in and she was set off my alarm bells as someone kind of different. She was wearing a sun hat, a straw hat, sunglasses, carrying an umbrella, was very, very nervous. And she was also just an inch or two taller than me. And that's unusual because I'm 4'10". So to see someone who is my size. So anyway, she filled out an application and she wanted to take it out of the office, which we didn't allow because we needed to keep the paper documents as records. We kind of had an argument about it. And she waved her application up in the air and I grabbed it and she ran out. An hour later, I was talking to some recruiters and then walked away from my desk to get a cup of coffee, which I never got because shortly after about 3 steps, I found myself on the other side of the room on the floor under a plant, not recognizing where I was, thought I describe it as I was somewhere between conscious and unconscious. What had happened, leaving out tons of details, is that this woman was a terrorist from the FALN, Puerto Rican national group. And she left a bomb in her umbrella, in the umbrella stand, about 10 feet away from my desk. Had I not walked away, I would not be here. So when I came to, I was in a totally unrecognizable situation. The whole front of the building blew out into the street. There was no ceiling. The walls were down. There was rubble everywhere. There was blood everywhere. So that was the start of my trauma. And quite frankly, that was the easy part. I was evacuated from 3 more buildings that day. 100,000 people were evacuated in New York that day because there were several bombing warnings, threats. After that, here comes the Bermuda part. Because I had lived there in high school, my father sent me to Bermuda for 2 weeks to get away from the news media, which was great. But when I came back, I was arrested at the airport because sending me away interfered with the interrogation and the investigation of the bombing. And I was still considered a suspect. We were all, because working there, were suspects. And so now I was a fugitive. They don't treat you really nicely when you're a fugitive. I was cleared after a couple of weeks. Then I left to go to graduate school. And for the next 3 years, I was back and forth to New York City to identify people in lineups, for more interviews. So the trauma repeated itself because I had to repeat the story over and over and over again and learn about more fugitives and more danger. And I never knew when they were coming, when the New York police was coming to get me because they were afraid I was going to leave the country. That lasted for 3 more years. And then when they apprehended Marie Torres, who was the terrorist, I had to testify against her in a murder trial, federal murder trial. Between all of that happening, I had virtually no support because PTSD was not even known at that time, wasn't recognized. Neither was traumatic brain injury or concussions because I was walking and talking and I didn't have any broken limbs. It was assumed I was okay, but I was not okay. And people saying, oh, you'll get better, time will heal all wounds, forgive and forget, move on. You can't. Not just my trauma, but any kind of trauma. You're not able to just move on and forget it. And so that lack of support added to my trauma because I couldn't find a therapist that could work with me. I was medicated. That was about the extent of it. So it took 5 years before I finally found a therapist who could work with me. Living with nightmares, flashbacks, panic attacks, not being able to eat, not being able to sleep, a whole host of physical symptoms and pain that has persisted, changed, and diminished. But 48 years later, I still have symptoms.
And how
So
are
that's
you
it.
managing the symptoms? Like, first of all, What do you know now about the injuries you sustained?
I I know that I had a head injury, even
Hmm.
though it wasn't diagnosed, because I had incredible learning problems afterwards. Graduate school was really difficult. I have a photographic memory, and when I went to grad school, it was gone. Learning was so challenging. So you can have memory problems from trauma as well, but and I think that I had both from both. But I know now that it was the trauma, but I thought I was crazy. And it's too bad that there was no diagnosis at that time. Because if I had a diagnosis, I would have had a reason for why I was feeling what I was feeling and maybe have some direction in how to find some recovery and some healing and some, I did what I could. I did a lot of whatever I could do with self help and learn how to relax and do the whole bunch of strategies, but was really on my own back then. So that was tough.
Yeah, I can imagine so. And what did healing look like for you, even with you doing it on your own, learning how to manage like how you're feeling? How have you, what have you done post this? I mean, this is doing numbers in my head 40 years ago, almost 50 years ago. What has your healing looked like since then?
I think there has been healing every day. Initially, it was just getting through the day, getting my degree, going to work, getting my things done. I used a lot of positive affirmations. That was very helpful. I developed a lot of strategies for memory and planning and organization and established routines that helped me get through the day. But initially, it was like I would schedule everything every half hour that I had to do. So I knew that I ate and I knew that I took a shower and I knew that I cleaned my clothes. And because my memory was so impaired, I would forget those things. I also had some obsessive compulsive behaviors that I had to work through. And that was huge for me. But one of them was I carried a picture of the terrorists in my wallet for years. And I understand that a lot of people do that. They carry pictures of the person that they were, if they were involved with a person with their trauma, that they carry a picture of the person with them. And I did. And I would take it out and I would look at it like 100 times a day. Feel awful, put it away, feel better. But it was very disruptive.
Hmm.
And it took me, I did have cognitive behavioral therapy for many years, and that I finally was able to break free of that behavior. But I did a lot of, I never did any substance abuse, never drank. The thing that I did compulsively was run.
Hmm.
So I would run, I ran several 50-mile races. I mean, I really ran. But when I ran, it was like my mind was free of everything. And that was extremely helpful to me. And the other thing that I did was bred and showed dogs. And now I just train dogs. I'm not breeding anymore. But the dogs and the dog community, all we talked about was dogs. So I didn't have to ever talk about my past or what I was dealing with. We were always focused on that. So those two things carried me through. And in 2015, I found my way to EMDR,
Mm.
which was a life changing thing for me. The therapist I went to said I was ready because we were done in like 2 sessions. But the pain was gone. I could never get back into reliving the bombing again because I was still having flashbacks, particularly after the Boston Marathon bombing and 9/11. All that stuff came back with a vengeance. So I could never get back into it again or ever feel it. And it's to the point, if you don't know about flashbacks, it's not just like remembering the past. I could smell the gunfire. I could smell the explosion. I could feel the pressure of the building and the air around me from the explosion. I could sometimes see blood on the walls around me. So I was totally transported back to that place. And I can't do that anymore. And that's wonderful.
Yeah, that's something to celebrate because
Yeah.
you're definitely held hostage
Yes.
by those memories until you're able to shift them. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, and you don't have to answer this, but I'm curious. Based on how you describe the story, it seems that you were the sole person that interacted with the terrorists.
Correct.
Okay. Did you have any feelings of guilt because you interacted with her and perhaps you didn't identify any warning signs or anything that would have alerted you to? And if you didn't, that's fine, but I'm just curious, because we often process trauma as a heavy load, and oftentimes we take on that responsibility ourselves.
Mhm.
So that's why I'm asking.
I knew that she was different and odd, but as I said earlier, we had a lot of interesting people come in off the streets of New York. Who would ever think that a terrorist would come into the office? And she was only a month older than me. I was 21. So if you're going to profile a terrorist, you don't think of a young woman.
Mhm.
So it never dawned on me that she could be anything bad. Of course, I was naive too.
Mhm.
But guilt, I can tell you where I had guilt. I was the man that was standing at my desk, who was a recruiter who came in every week, was killed. And his body shielded me from the explosion. And he was killed and I was not. That's where my guilt is. I have survivor guilt from that day. I feel like, why him, not me? Why did I walk away? Why did that happen 5 seconds after I walked away from my desk? My desk was totally demolished. That whole corner of the room was demolished. Like, why? Why? I don't know, but it wasn't my time. It was, but whatever. But I still have guilt from that.
So you still carry that guilt.
I do. I do.
And have you, in your therapy and in the things that you've done in relation to your healing, is the guilt something that you addressed?
It is, but it needs to be addressed again. After I just wrote a book, which we can talk about later, but after writing the book and now talking about it, and people are asking me questions about it, I realize that I have some guilt and some anger that I need to deal with. So I'm in the process of starting some therapy again to
Hmm.
address those issues that I didn't realize were still there and bothering me.
And the reason why I asked that, right? I think at the core of being in trauma survival mood, sorry, is those emotions that don't necessarily serve us. And what happens is our brain is so magnificent in compartmentalizing and packing away. However, we can be triggered very easily, even after we've done a lot of healing, which is why I don't believe in the word healed unless we're talking
Mhm.
about a cut or
Yeah.
some sort of physical ailment. But when it comes to the emotional stuff, as you said, like this literally was 48 years ago, now that I'm done the math in my head, right? And you've actively worked on your healing. However, now that you're in this space, you're promoting your book, you are now having to relive these moments in your storytelling. And no matter how many times you say it, there's still a moment where you revisit that day.
Yeah.
And our healing happens in waves, our triggers happen in waves, and I
Yeah.
think I would just want to highlight that to the audience, right? Like from the outside, from probably someone who is quite naive in understanding trauma, it would be like, what? That was almost like a half a century ago. How are you still being triggered? How do you still have these feelings? But that's why trauma is such a big topic, right? Even with me, even with what I went through, I packed it away. It happened when I was 21, 22 in that area, and I packed it away and I went on with my life. But it reared its head
Right.
consistently in ways that I didn't expect. I remember watching a movie, and I can't even remember what movie it was. Actually, it wasn't a movie, it was a Netflix show. It was The Maid. And I remember avoiding watching that for a very long time because I didn't want to watch I can't watch anything that actively involves abuse. It's triggering because I've been through that. And I remember watching The Maid and initially thinking, okay, this is not as bad as I thought it would be because there was no physical violence. However, it was probably an interaction that the lady had with her mother that was so triggering for me. And I was like, whoa, it's so different from my own story. There was no physical violence, right? Like there was just threats of violence or threats, intentional intimidation. But I felt so triggered in the moment that her mother was slightly dismissive of her. Like that triggered me immensely. And I think
Hmm.
most people don't recognize because we are often able to pick up the pieces and move on with our lives. Most times we don't have any other choice. We have to pick up the pieces and move on.
Right.
And let's be real. Let's consider the time that this incident happened. We weren't aware of trauma back then,
No.
right?
No.
So you wouldn't have had some mentor, trauma recovery mentor following up with you. You probably didn't even really have a debrief by a psychologist or anything
No.
like that, right?
No.
You
Nothing.
probably went to the hospital, they looked at you, okay, cool, and on
We
with your
didn't even we didn't even go to the hospital.
wow.
They took us up to the medical department. It took us back into the building that had just been bombed to the medical department. The nurse looked at us and said, well, you're not bleeding and you're talking. They actually said you can go back to work, but we were like, we don't have an office. And at that point, there was another bomb threat and the whole building was evacuated. So we got evacuated a second time. But yeah,
Yeah,
there
so
was
there was
nothing.
no assistance. You just had to get on with your life. And you suspect that, you probably had a concussion as a result because of what happened, not even a concussion, a brain injury as a
Yep.
result, which you've had to navigate primarily on your own. And this is why these conversations, in my opinion, are so important, right? Because oftentimes we have a traumatic event might not be a bombing or anything as severe as some people have experienced. However, we have to go on with our lives. And that pinpoints the need to be able to take ownership of our own healing.
Yeah.
Because if we don't, it keeps showing up. Even if we do, there's a possibility of it keep showing up. And it takes a long time to rewrite that. Um,
Wow. Yeah. 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 I always say that recovering or healing from PTSD is like peeling away the layers of an onion. You have something that you're working on, and you get through that layer, and everything is fine for a while, and then you come along, another piece shows up that you need to peel and deal with. And those pieces are there forever. one day, very recently, my husband said to me, "When are you going to be all better?" And I said, "I don't think I'll ever be all better. There's always something that is going to come up. I think I'm doing great, but we still need to be prepared for those moments where I'm going to struggle for one reason or another."
And I think it also comes down to being able to be honest with ourselves as well, right? Like being able to recognize that something is different. You noticed that something was different, particularly when you went off to graduate school. You noticed that, your photographic memory was not there anymore and you really struggled in that environment. And I suspect your running was, I don't want to say a distraction, but maybe a healing distraction for
Yeah,
you
I agree.
so that you can manage what was going on underneath the surface.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
Um,
let's talk about your book now. Tell us a little bit more about what it's about and what moved you to write about it.
my book called Missing Pieces, a terrorist attack survivor's memoir of trauma, resilience, and healing. And I started writing it on the recommendation of a therapist who I did EMDR with. She said to me, "You ought to write a book. Your story is really interesting. It's also historical, and I think a lot of people would benefit from it." And I was like, nobody's going to want to read about my story. But I started writing, and as I started writing, I started just delving into more newspaper articles, and I connected with the brother of the man that was killed in the bombing, and just started to help me a lot. It helped me piece things together because my life was kind of a black hole because of my memory. So this helped me put everything into a timeline that made sense. And as I was writing, I realized that there was value to my story because there's a lot of violence and a lot of trauma. And it doesn't matter what your trauma is, it still affects your life. We have many of the same kinds of symptoms and feelings. And I think by reading my book, you will know you're not alone, that a lot of the feelings and things that are happening to you are normal trauma responses. And I wish I had known that my responses were really normal to something that was pretty horrific. That is so helpful information to have. And it's my story also talks about identity because that is a big component of healing from trauma as well. I was really robbed of my identity when after about a month after the trauma, I didn't recognize myself. And my original name was Jane, and I changed it. I could not call myself Jane anymore because I did not know anything about who Jane was. So there's a lot of identity issues in my book, but a lot of positive things as well. How my dogs help me, the strategies that I used and I found, and a theme of everyone has the strengths within them, I believe. And you just have to believe in yourself and be willing to be open to finding it.
You mentioned the trauma responses, and I said to you prior to recording that one of the reasons why I started this podcast was because I recognized my trauma responses 2 decades after some of my most horrific trauma. And it was this aha moment of, had I known this, my life would have looked completely different. So I
Yes,
celebrate you for writing that book because this is like your tool guide to helping other people be able to identify what's going on beneath the surface for them. A lot of us really just don't know, right? I talk a lot about like the survival identities that we pick up as a result of trauma. Sometimes it's people pleasing and overachieving. We do things that aren't aligned with us, but we don't know how to say no. And I remember you mentioning earlier about having to set boundaries and like it things really change for you. And I think it's so important for us to recognize that although our traumas may be different, the way we respond to the trauma is very much the same. And it shows up for a lot of people in very negative ways. And while you did mention, you didn't have any substance abuse issues, but your coping mechanisms were extreme as well, right?
Yes, they were very much, very much. But I called them healthy addictions.
Yes. Um, but it does, we do move into this space where we subconsciously distract ourselves from what is going on, and we may not even be aware of that. And I think it's key because as your story clearly demonstrates, the trauma doesn't go anywhere. You know, and we have to actively do something about it if we want our quality of life to
Right.
be better. So I enjoyed this conversation and I would love to know a little bit more about how we can connect with you online and how to get your book.
Well, my book is available on Amazon. It is both as a paperback and Kindle. So read my book. Get inspired. I have a website, and it is www. And this is all one word, christianscarpino.net. And I have blogs. I blog. There's my story, testimonials, things that I'm going to be working on. I also have an email list. If anyone is interested in my email list, you can email me at Whalom, WHALOM, at gmail.com. And I don't spam. I only do about once a month email, but it lets people know what's coming up. I am working on a second book. This is a self-help book for people with PTSD. The things that I wish that I knew, the strategies that I found and used that were effective and that are simple and don't cost anything. I have a chapter on self-advocacy and a chapter on how to use books. but but very very simple. It's not a replacement for therapy, but it's things that you can do, anyone can do, that are very helpful that you don't need someone to do with you or really show you how to do. And again, I think we're all responsible for our own healing. And these are some things that you can do to take responsibility. So I'm hoping, it's a book that I wish that I had. And there are many books out there, but as I have a stack of them that I bought, they're also complicated. There are just too many chapters on theory, and I think that's great. But if you really want to do something, you don't want to be reading 2 chapters or 20 pages before you get to the meat of what do I do when I have negative thoughts, So I will have resources in the back for people that want to know more, but mine is just the meat.
Yeah. Well, I love that, and I'll make sure the information is in the show notes so the audience can connect with you. So
Oh,
before we
great.
wrap it all up, one key takeaway for the audience to action.
Love you have to believe in yourself and to really believe that and understand that you have the power to get better and to make things better. You can affect changes. You can't change what happened to you, but you can change how you respond to it. And it's
Absolutely.
learning what you can do, how to change those thoughts, your own thoughts, because your thoughts aren't reality. Your thoughts are thoughts. I mean, if you act on your thoughts, they can become reality. But just a thought is a thought,
Hmm.
and those can be changed, and that's very powerful.
Absolutely. We have so much more control than we give ourselves credit for. And we can change the way that we respond. We can change the way that we show up. And those things change the way that we experience the world. So, Christy, thank you again for your time on Survival Mode Disrupted, and audience. Thank you for catching another episode. I just want to remind you, you were not built to break, but you damn sure were not built to just survive. Disrupt the cycle, reclaim your life, and thrive on your own terms. And I'll see you next week. Once again, thank you for joining another episode of Survival Mode Disrupted, hosted by the Survival Mode Disruptor, Letitia. You didn't land here by accident. This conversation, it probably cracked something open on purpose. Because survival mode isn't just a phase, it's a pattern, an identity, a prison masked as strength. But here's the truth. You're not broken, you're just unfinished. So if something stirred in you today, don't ignore it, don't numb it, move with it. And I want to once again invite you to join Disrupting Survival Mode, the Facebook community where healing is loud and messy and real. I also want to invite you to buy my book, The Survival Mode Action Plan, because your breakthrough deserves a blueprint. And if you felt seen today, be sure to share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and drop a review. That's how I amplify the voices that need to be heard. And remember, this isn't about fixing yourself. This is about finding yourself again beneath the rubble. Until next time, choose ease, choose power, choose you. This is Survival Mode Disrupted. Let's keep shaking shit up.